My name is Emma Hayward, and if anyone asked me who I was as a child, the answer would be simple: Brooke's younger sister. Not Emma, the smart, observant, quiet one. Not Emma, the one who could sit for hours with a book, oblivious to time. But simply that other one. We grew up in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, in a large house with a white porch, a manicured lawn, and a maple tree in the yard that my father loved to trim every spring. That yard was a stage, a real, living, bustling stage, on which my sister shone time and again. Every weekend, our house became the center of the universe for the whole family. Cars lined the street, the gate remained open, and the air filled with the smell of grilled meat, sweet barbecue sauce, and laughter. My father stood by the grill, an apron and a beer in hand, while my mother scurried between the tables, checking everyone had drinks. "Brooke, honey, sing something." Aunt Joan's voice would always ring out. And then the show would begin. Brooke would jump up onto a wooden bench or simply stand under a maple tree. Her blonde hair glistened in the sun, her smile confident, almost adult. She'd pretend to clear her throat and begin singing, loudly, clearly, with such passion that the adults would freeze, then burst into applause. She's got a God-given talent. A future star, I tell you. My mother beamed. My father wiped his eyes, as if this were his personal triumph. And I stood at the edge of the yard. Sometimes I hid behind the bushes. Sometimes I sat on the steps, clutching a book tightly to me. I didn't envy her voice. Honestly, I just knew there was no place for me on the stage. When I tried to sing, it came out terribly. Off-key, breaking down. Poetry? I'd get flustered, stumbling over the words, blushing. My relatives would exchange glances. Some would laugh condescendingly. "She's nothing like Brooke," they'd whisper, thinking I couldn't hear. But I heard. Everything. My parents saw the difference, too. Brooke was taken to vocal, dance, and art classes. Her schedule was more packed than an adult's. And me? I was independent. That's what they called it. "Emma will find something to do on her own," my mother would say, handing me old textbooks or clothes Brooke had outgrown. And I did. I found myself in books. In the old bookcase in the living room, where tomes on history, biology, and economics were gathering dust. I could sit on the floor for hours, leafing through pages, and the world around me would disappear. The only person who noticed was Aunt Ruth, Grandma's sister. Short, gray-haired, with a soft voice and an attentive gaze. "What are you reading today, Emma?" she'd ask, sitting next to me on the porch. "About ancient Rome," I'd answer. She'd smile. "You think deeper than many adults. Remember that." These words were my salvation. With her, I didn't have to sing, perform, or prove myself. I could be myself. But even her support couldn't save me from the feeling of being unseen. When Brooke received awards, gifts, new clothes, I'd get pats on the back. When she shone, I disappeared. School became my refuge. There, it didn't matter who sang louder. There, it mattered who knew. I asked questions, stayed after class, asked for extra materials. The teachers noticed me. "You have an analytical mind, Emma," said Mrs. Carter, the biology teacher. I absorbed knowledge like air. It was my thing. By senior year, I was one of the top students. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was the best at something. But at home, everything remained the same. When they started talking about college for Brooke at dinner, prestigious, expensive, I suddenly said, "I want to go too. I want to study management." There was silence at first, and then laughter. "Oh, Emma?" Mom wiped her eyes. "It's not for you. We've already invested everything in Brooke. I felt something inside me crack. But I'm an excellent student, I said quietly. I have top grades. Dad shrugged. Well, someone has to work, too. That night, I cried like I never had before. But along with the tears came a decision. If they don't give me a chance, I'll take it myself. And it was at that moment that my life began to change. The decision to leave doesn't mature overnight. It doesn't come suddenly, like a flash of lightning. It accumulates from words, looks, silences. From moments when you stand in a room and realize you're not there. After that dinner, there was no more conversation. My parents acted as if I hadn't said anything, as if my desire to study was a childish fantasy that could simply be endured. My mother continued to help Brooke with her portfolio for a creative college in Chicago. My father discussed loans and scholarships for her with relatives. My name was never mentioned in these conversations. I began spending even more time at school. I was the first one to arrive and the last one to leave. The teachers already knew. If Emma stayed after the bell, it meant she really needed to figure something out. I took on extra assignments, participated in competitions, prepared as if my whole life depended on it. Because, frankly, it did. In the evenings, I returned to a house that felt less and less like home to me. Brooke was rehearsing songs in her room, her voice echoing through the hallways. Mom sat with her, discussing upcoming auditions. I passed by like a shadow. Sometimes Brooke looked at me with a slight awkwardness. Not anger, more like indifference. She was used to being the center of attention. I was the background. One day after school, Mrs. Carter stopped me. Emma, have you applied to colleges? I shook my head.
No.
She frowned. With your grades, you could get a scholarship. Why don't you even try? I said it out loud for the first time. My parents aren't going to help me. Mrs. Carter was silent for a long moment, then handed me a list. These are universities that value academic achievement.
Give them to them.
Even if it seems like there's no chance. I tucked the piece of paper into my backpack as if it were a ticket to another life. That evening, I went to Aunt Ruth's. Her house was small, old, smelling of tea and cinnamon. It was always quiet. You look tired, honey, she said, pouring me tea. And I broke down. I told her everything. About college, laughter, my parents' plans, a distant relative's restaurant where they'd find me a job. She listened silently. Then she got up, went into another room, and returned with an envelope. I've been saving this money for a rainy day, she said calmly. Looks like it's finally here. You have to study, Emma. I burst into tears, unable to stop. I can't take this. You can, she said firmly. Because you're not asking. You deserve it. We applied together. I wrote motivational letters at night, rewriting every sentence dozens of times. I wasn't asking for pity. I was writing the truth. About how knowledge had become my refuge. About how I wanted to manage processes, create systems, and make my business honest and sustainable. The answer came in the spring. I got in, with a partial scholarship, to the University of Cincinnati in the management department. When I told my parents this, my father just sighed. We can't afford it, he said. And we won't even try. My mother added, Ruth shouldn't waste her money on your ambitions. That was the last straw. A week later, I packed my things. Everything I could fit into 2 suitcases. As I was walking down the stairs, Brooke was sitting on the couch with her phone. She looked up. Are you really leaving? Yes. She nodded. Good luck. Emotionless.
No regrets.
Aunt Ruth greeted me at the door with a hug. You're home, she said. And for the first time in a long time, I felt it was true. The summer flew by in preparation. I worked in the library, saving every penny. I read everything I could find on economics and management. I was afraid. Afraid of failing. Afraid of not being as smart as I thought. But fear no longer paralyzed me. It drove me forward. On the first day of university, I stood in front of the columned building and thought, I'm here for a reason. I took my first step into the void and didn't fall. University turned out to be completely different from what I'd imagined. It was more difficult, noisier, and more indifferent than school, but it was in this indifference that I felt free for the first time. Here, no one cared who my sister was, what family I came from, or how many times I'd been underestimated at home. Here, there was only one question. What can you do? The first weeks were hard. I lived with Aunt Ruth and rode the bus for almost an hour every day. Sometimes I'd return late at night, exhausted from lectures and my part-time job at the campus library. Money was still tight. I learned to economize on everything: food, clothing, entertainment. But even in the most difficult moments, I felt I belonged. Studying demanded total dedication. The professors didn't coddle the students. The assignments were tough, the deadlines merciless. In my very first seminar on the fundamentals of management, Professor Green said something that has stuck in my memory. Those who seek praise don't survive here. Those who know how to think survive here.
I knew how to think.
I sat in the front row, wrote down every word, asked questions that sometimes irritated my classmates. I wasn't accepted right away. Some thought I was boring, others thought I was an upstart. But I didn't care. I'd been invisible for too long to diminish myself again for the sake of others' comfort. Over time, I made acquaintances.
Then friends.
Equally driven, tired, living on coffee and dreams. We studied for exams together, debated business models, and dozed over textbooks. For the first time in my life, I was among people who valued my depth, not my loudness. Letters from home were rare. Mostly from my mother, dry, formal. Occasionally, she mentioned Brooke. Brooke's involved in projects. Brooke's looking for an internship. Brooke's thinking about the future. I read these lines without pain.
Something changed inside me.
One evening, Aunt Ruth called me. Her voice was strange, tense. Emma, are you sitting down now? I knew immediately that something had happened. Brooke dropped out of college. The news hit me like cold water. According to Aunt Ruth, Brooke suddenly returned home and announced that this wasn't her path. The truth emerged later. Pregnancy. An affair with a guy from a wealthy family. Hopes for a good life. She's sure everything will work out, Aunt Ruth sighed. But everything is too shaky. I sat in silence for a long time after the call. Feelings I was ashamed to admit warred within me. Relief.
Sadness.
And a strange, frightening realization. I was no longer in the shadows. My studies were going well. I was getting high grades and I was noticed. One of my professors offered me a research project. Then came an internship at a small consulting company. I worked late, absorbing experience and learning to make decisions. Meanwhile, the news about Brooke was getting increasingly grim. My father had lost part of his income. My mother was nervous. Brooke's boyfriend disappeared when he realized the situation wasn't so simple. And then Aunt Ruth said something that took my breath away. Brooke got a job as a waitress. At the very restaurant they were trying to get you. The irony was almost cruel. I wasn't gloating. Really. But somewhere deep down, I felt the circle closing. It was as if fate were flipping the board, rearranging the pieces. By my third year, I was one of the top students in my class. My name was known. I was recommended. I stopped doubting myself. And that's when my mom called me for the first time. "We're proud of you," she said hesitantly. These words came too late to change anything, but early enough to remind me. Roles do change. And I was ready for the next step. Graduation day arrived unexpectedly. It seemed like only yesterday I was sitting in a crowded auditorium, trying not to show the trembling in my hands, and now I stood in my gown, holding my diploma in my hands, and feeling a strange sense of emptiness and triumph at the same time. I had graduated with honors. My name was announced from the stage, clearly, confidently, without any annotations or comparisons. Aunt Ruth was sitting in the audience. She was crying openly. My parents were there too, looking proud but awkward, as if they weren't sure if they had the right to feel this way. Brooke wasn't there. She stayed home with the baby. A month after graduation, I received an offer that took my breath away. A junior manager position at the Silver Maple Restaurant Group, a rapidly growing chain in downtown Cincinnati. The work was challenging and demanded my full commitment, but I felt this was my chance. I dove headfirst into the work. I studied processes, optimized schedules, and interacted with staff. I wasn't trying to please everyone. I was trying to improve the system. Management noticed. A year later, I was promoted. Then again. I moved into a small but my own apartment. I bought my first car. I started helping Aunt Ruth. Now I paid her bills and brought groceries. And then family came around again. Cautiously at first.
Calls.
Messages. Polite questions. How are you? You're so busy, we understand. Then requests. Small ones. Fix the roof. Help with the medical bill. I agreed. It wasn't hard for me. And frankly, I still wanted their approval. When my mom invited me to a family dinner, I accepted. The house was the same, but the atmosphere was different. They listened to me. They asked questions. They were out loud proud of my successes. Brooke sat quietly, rocking her daughter. She looked tired, but grown up. "Thank you for coming," she said to me in the kitchen. "Of course." A few weeks later, my parents asked for more. "Maybe you can help Brooke with her work?" my mom said cautiously. I thought long and hard, but eventually I talked to management. Brooke was hired for an administrative position. And to my surprise, she handled it. There were no more tantrums. Just work. We didn't become close. But we became equals. My success grew. I participated in the openings of new restaurants, led negotiations, made decisions. My name became significant. And then the director called me into his office. "Emma, we want to expand. And we want you to lead it." I left the office with shaking hands. I was someone I'd once never even allowed myself to dream of becoming. But I didn't know then. The most difficult test was yet to come. Sometimes it seems that if you try long enough, if you give more than you take, the world will eventually even out. That gratitude will come naturally. I thought so too. Until that Sunday morning, when one short video shattered the illusion I'd been building for years. It was a rare day off. I was sitting on the balcony of my apartment, drinking coffee and mindlessly scrolling through my Facebook feed. The algorithms were pushing photos of other people's breakfasts, dogs, vacations. And then suddenly a new video from Aunt Ruth. I smiled. She often posted harmless videos of her garden, pies, or funny attempts to master the smartphone. I pressed play. At first, everything seemed normal. A family celebration.
A familiar courtyard.
Laughter. Glasses. The camera shook, catching snatches of conversation. And then I heard my mother's voice. "Emma?" She snorted, clearly drunk. "Oh, come on. She barely helps us. She's always on her own. We could have managed just fine without her." I froze. The camera turned, and my father appeared in the frame. He laughed loudly and unpleasantly. "She's just lucky." Everything she has is thanks to Brooke. At least she's real, and Emma just an administrator. Someone else nodded. Someone else added, yes, she's ungrateful. She's forgotten who raised her. I watched, unable to breathe. Everything I'd done, the money, the help, the repairs, the monthly transfers, Brooke's support, was erased in a few drunken sentences. It was as if I'd been driven back to that very corner of the yard where I'd stood as a child, book in hand, out of place and unnoticed. I scrolled down. Comments. My parents were demanding the video be deleted. They wrote in capital letters, threatened, made excuses. And among them, Aunt Ruth's comment. I don't know how to delete videos. But even if I did, I wouldn't. Emma's been carrying this family for years. Stop lying. Stop using her. You should be ashamed. I burst into tears, not from pain, but from clarity. I called Aunt Ruth. Did you see? She asked quietly. Yes. I'm sorry if I hurt you. No, I said after a pause. You told me the truth. We talked for a long time. About childhood, about my attempts to earn love, about how some people love not you, but what you do for them. That night, I made a decision. I wrote my parents a short message. I saw the video. I know what you really think of me. Financial support is being cut off. Don't call or text me anymore. The responses came almost immediately. First, apologies. Then accusations. Then demands. We are your parents. You have to. But for the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. I didn't reply. A few days later, Brooke wrote to me. I wasn't involved in this. But I can't be between you. I have a child. I accepted it. We continued working together, politely, professionally, without illusions. Suddenly, other relatives started writing to me. Those who had previously remained silent. We saw the video. You're incredible. You're an inspiration. I realized I hadn't lost my family. I'd simply stopped feeding those who fed on me. A month later, I was called into the CEO's office. He smiled and said,
I'm retiring.
And I want you to take my place. In that moment, I didn't feel triumph.
Peace.
Completion. I was no longer in the shadows. I wasn't the younger one. I wasn't the other one. I was Emma Hayward, a woman who persevered, who chose herself. And that was enough.